I'm Raffy Alunan. I'm a candidate for the Senate in May 2016. I'd like to present to you my proposed legislative agenda. I intend to craft new legislation, amend existing legislation, and junk obsolete or irrelevant legislation. And this will take up my time in the Senate if and when elected. I will focus on the following. First, good governance. Second, reforming the criminal justice system. Third, human and ecological security. Fourth, economic security and poverty reduction. And fifth, public safety, internal security, and national defense. My portfolios as Secretary of Tourism and Secretary of the Interior and Local Government, and roles in the private sector, embraced the foundations necessary for balanced growth and sustainable development. These foundations were integrity and competence, essential to governance and to the pursuit of human and ecological security, justice, peace, public safety, social reform, poverty reduction, and internal security. Let me touch base on good governance. This actually is at the top of my list, where we need elected and appointed officials with the right stuff, who do the right things and do things the right way. We need a critical mass of reliable leaders, policymakers, and administrators. Good governance in the public and private realms is everyone's responsibility. For good government, two traits must go hand in hand, like two sides of a coin: integrity and competence. In our national language, matino at mahusay. Our officials must be imbued with the right stuff, honest, capable, and selfless service to deliver results to a nation starved of good governance. A very important component to good governance is justice, because the lack of it breeds social discontent, sustains the growing disparity between the rich and the poor, and fans the flames of armed rebellion. Social injustice stems from society's character flaws and the government's failing criminal justice system. In that regard, several codes and laws will have to be reviewed and amended where necessary to give the executive and judicial branches, including the Ombudsman and Sandigan Bayan, the teeth needed to firmly enforce the law and deliver timely justice to end the culture of entitlement and impunity. Reforming the criminal justice system throughout its spectrum, police, prosecution, courts, and jails, where anyone with the right connections and legal clout can easily escape or evade the system, is top of mind. The Ramos years were highlighted by reforms in the Philippine National Police. We called that Oplan Pagbabago, and it centered on meritocracy. However, these were not sustained by succeeding administrations. We need to have a complementary review of the revised penal code, administrative code, civil service code, local government code, the Code of Conduct for Public Officials, the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act, and other interrelated laws, including and especially their respective internal rules and regulations, or IRRs. That would be needed in order to close loopholes and align legal provisions. Another crucial component is right-sizing the bureaucracy and reducing red tape. These are crucial to good governance. Good government needs good people who get good pay. Weeding out scalawags and retraining the mediocre will restore meritocracy. Fewer personnel will mean savings that can be plowed back to increase the salaries and benefits of those who were retained and for those who will have to be hired. Society has long endured the burden of abuse and neglect by self-serving public officials who have enriched and entrenched themselves by taking advantage of society's softness. The law must work in favor of the people, the victims of crime, and the innocent. And the Senate could further contribute to that ideal by providing effective oversight of the executive. The Management Association of the Philippines, to which I belong, advocates for integrity, competence, and proper execution for best results. As a signatory of the Integrity Initiative, I respect the dictum that society gets the government it deserves. If the business sector demands good governance from public officials, it too must practice good corporate governance and social responsibility for the greater good. In that regard, I think that two initiatives are crucial to that: Leveling the Playing Field and the Freedom of Information Act. President Ramos's administration strove to break up cartels and monopolies by leveling the playing field to steadily diminish government capture. As such, the oil, energy, water, telecommunications, and transportation sectors were deregulated and or privatized. It aimed for a balanced distribution of socioeconomic benefits to benefit a broader population base. I think this policy thrust must be pursued or continued to include agriculture and industry to further open up the economy and create new wealth. A combination of executive orders and new laws, including and especially constitutional amendments to improve our business competitiveness, will be required. The Freedom of Information Bill, to my mind, aims to improve the government's integral capacity to enforce the law without fear or favor and assure transparency and accountability. However, there must be proper safeguards to prevent leakage of state secrets or misuse of information protected by the Data Privacy Act, which may also require scrutiny. On the second point, human and ecological security. Human security cuts across the board to include food security, energy security, water security, job security, basic services such as education, housing and health, and public safety. I will prioritize the following in that regard for human security. 1. Agro-industrial tourism development to revive the sector, ensure food security, and create new wealth to reduce poverty, reverse the diaspora, and decongest the cities. A return to the countryside will enhance agro and eco-tourism and further add value to economic development. And decongestion provides openings for urban renewal and the benefits that flow from it, such as the disappearance of urban blight, the cleanup of the streets and rivers, and manageable traffic. Priority legislation will focus on providing land reform beneficiaries all the capacity building, financial, technical, mechanization, insurance, and other support needed to convert their farms into profitable enterprises. Irrigation infrastructure and the fertilizer and the availability and affordability of fertilizer are vital to the equation, as well as energy and water security legislation. Basic commodities, high-value crops and livestock from raw materials to finished products are top of mind to enrich our agricultural sector. In that regard, joint ventures in downstream manufacturing and global marketing of finished goods will be encouraged. And related to that is economic diplomacy to lure foreign investors and joint venture partners, which will be a crucial element to ensure long-term success. The economic growth of the agriculture and manufacturing sectors are outstripped by the services sector. But wherever one looks, job security, particularly job tenure, is threatened by the practice of contractualization. This undermines the principles of fairness and justice. This practice must stop, and labor laws will need to be reviewed as well as the enforcement mechanisms. Contractualization deprives people of their right to better pay and benefits and job security. It only fuels unwanted anxieties that lead to labor unrest and underperformance. Limited purchasing power equates to low consumer spending, which is not beneficial to the business sector in the long run. We also need to improve the quality of education and the quality of our educators for our youth. Values, patriotism, good manners, and right conduct should be instilled in the early years of character formation, like it was during my time. The content pushed to the hearts and minds of our youth will be scrutinized, and the capability of our teachers enhanced. Our population is gradually aging, and the services required to care for them are inadequate. So that's another concern. In that regard, I will work for the health protection of seniors and retirees who no longer have regular sources of income except their meager pensions. So think SSS. Furthermore, adequate PhilHealth coverage and public-private healthcare centers for seniors are at the top of this agenda. Ecological security, where protection of our natural lifelines are essential to our long-term survival and national well-being, such as forests, watersheds, mangroves, waterways, and corals, will be given top priority to save lives, protect property, and secure the economy. In that regard, I'll look into legislation that will enhance our capacity for risk reduction, emergency preparedness, and crisis management at the national and local government levels, including the uniformed services capabilities and capacities to swiftly and effectively respond. Community preparedness will also be part of that agenda. A modernized climate change adapted land use policy and urban planning code are integral to this effort in light of rising sea levels, reduction of land mass, and loss of potable aquifers to salination. The Senate must have the foresight to craft legislation to protect the future of succeeding generations. Another priority would be public safety, internal security, and national defense. We must protect the people and defend the country to win the future at all times. That's all about national security. Peace and order is a conditio sine qua non, or prerequisite to development. In places where people live in peace to freely pursue their dreams without fear and oppression, their performance across the board improves significantly. The professionalization, modernization, and sustained funding of our uniformed services for credible deterrence to detect, deter, and defeat any threat against the people's welfare and the country's integrity will be foremost in my legislative agenda. Without effective deterrence, our economic and diplomatic policies will be left vulnerable and exposed to internal and external threats. Furthermore, the pursuit of peace in the countryside and with our regional neighbors depends on the government's capacity to protect and defend. And that begins with the executive's mindset and skill sets. The balance of power principle calls for legislative oversight to determine preparedness of the executive to serve and save. In that regard, I will review the government's implementation of its counter-insurgency policy as well, in the areas of comprehension, program completeness, and actual execution to determine and close legislative gaps, if any. I will also review the security of our vital infrastructure to determine if they are under our control and if they are vulnerable to intrusion and sabotage. Crafting legislation to revise the negative list and place vital infrastructure in Filipino hands may be necessary. Remember this: all self-respecting nations have potent external defense capabilities to defend themselves against any threat. We have neglected that area, and I will champion legislation that will require a definition of the national interest, call for a national plan and a national strategy to determine our requirements for external defense, and to serve as the basis for the professionalization and modernization of the uniformed services. It will be risk-based with a long-term view. Part of that considers a capable Coast Guard and Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources to effectively prevent intrusions in our EEZ and poaching of our maritime resources. Our fishing industries and small fishermen's fishing grounds will be defended. Piracy will be obviated, and natural spawning grounds protected from foreign intruders with local support. I am sure that the investment will pay for itself in the long run. As for the armed forces, we need a strong Navy and Air Force with modern warfare capability and interoperability with allied forces, with enough credible force to make any hostile nation think twice before provoking our country. And there are several antecedents to make that happen. First, I think we need to look at the procurement law and see whether it needs amendment, including the IRRs, to enlarge the base of capable suppliers, both local and global, to enable the government the flexibility to decide between quality and quantity. Second, we need to establish defense industrial parks under joint venture with foreign nations to produce security and defense products and services that we need for credible deterrence, and to serve as a platform for export that will contribute or be beneficial to our economic development. The third is looking for sufficient long-term funding, such as funding from the General Appropriations Act, from government-to-government negotiations, from lend-lease arrangements, from long-term loans, from even bonds, long-term bonds, for the purchase of primary hard assets, critical support infrastructure, and the development of our human capital in the defense and security sectors. We also need to fund local investors and the research and development sector to establish indigenous capability. And in pursuit of the total force capability between what we call the regular forces and the citizen soldiers, we will need to develop our reserve forces, and part of this development will be the restoration of the ROTC program. Now, let me touch on some personal views that was brought up by the agenda that I read on several points that touch on our morality. I was brought up to know the difference between right and wrong, and to respect diversity, human life, women and their role in society, and to appreciate that the foundations of society lie in a loving and harmonious family environment. That's fundamental to me. My education was obtained at home from parents who taught by example and were hands-on in terms of building character and a balanced personality. The LaSalle Christian Brothers reinforced this in school by instilling in us the Ten Commandments, the way of life of Jesus Christ, the humanities, and the values of faith, service, and communion. Stewardship and social action were ingrained in us, and we applied the values we learned through our immersion in poor communities. Now, for some specifics. Abortion to me is both illegal and immoral in our country. Perhaps there are exceptions, or extraordinary circumstances like a bad pregnancy that threatens the life of the mother as well. And I think in that area there's enough moral and legal guidance to avert abortion or to carry it out. The second is euthanasia, which is assisted suicide. There may be extraordinary reasons that could medically call for it, but that belongs to the legal and medical realm. From a moral standpoint, euthanasia, for me, co-opts the will of God. On the death penalty. The death penalty is often resorted to as a harsh measure to sow fear in the minds of potential and hardened criminals. Good intentions. But, as far as I'm concerned, having been chairman of the National Police Commission, concurrently as the Secretary of Interior and Local Government, for as long as the criminal justice system is weak and ineffective, due to corruption and inefficiency, no one will fear the long arm of the law, even with a death sentence in place. The only exception where I could lean towards it is for crimes against humanity, like genocide, and repeated acts of terror against soft targets. I would justify that as the moral use of force in defense of a threatened and hapless society. On divorce, there are specific guidelines used by the Church for divorce, and the state also provides the same for civil marriages. My advice is to just follow those guidelines. I also am realistic enough to understand that not all marriages are compatible, especially in cultures where marriages are either arranged or forced for convenience and advantage. In any case, marriage is a holy sacrament and a condition where a couple must work at it daily to nurture love, build respect, and develop a long-term partnership to grow a family, to be responsible members of society. I've been married for 46 years. I have 5 married children and 11 grandchildren. With my wife, they are my treasures. My parting words are this. They touch on heart in public service. For the longest time, a debate was raging within me whether to return to public life or not. My head kept saying no, while my heart was steady on yes. On the second to the last day of filing, on October 15 actually, I decided to say no and even went on social media to explain why. I even told my wife that I was at peace, but I was totally wrong, dead wrong, because I misread myself. The next morning, I woke up with a very heavy feeling in my chest. And a call by Dick Gordon, my other running mate in the Bagumbayan party that he set up a few years ago. He said exactly the same thing, that he was feeling very bad about the decision we arrived at the night before. And that led us to turn 180 degrees on October 16. I decided to listen to my heart and decided right there and then to run for a seat in the Philippine Senate in May. Public service is indeed about heart. It's love of country and love of people that motivates me to serve in government. The lack of it for anyone will naturally turn to self-service. When I joined the government in 1989, it was about serving at a time when the country was floundering and the people were reeling from natural and man-made crisis. I left it 7 years later when the situation had stabilized and my family ached to have me home after 7 years of virtual absence. I left it as I came in, just by myself, without a cent more in the bank than the day I joined it. It was my mother's pure heart that kept my wife and family going while I served the country. My motto then, as it was in the Army when I commanded an Army division, was Salvare Servimus. In English, we serve to save. That is the same mindset and heart set that I will bring back to public service should I get elected to the Philippine Senate with your help in May 2016. Thank you for your kind attention, and God bless.